In the year 1647, the city of Ravenscourt lay beneath a veil of perpetual fog, the sun rarely piercing the thick clouds that clung to the cobblestone streets. Merchants whispered of strange occurrences, pets disappearing, whispers in empty alleyways, and the distant sound of mournful bells tolling at midnight. Among the city's crooked towers, a solitary figure moved with deliberate caution, Lord Alaric Wren, a man whose reputation for cold cunning preceded him. His gaunt frame and piercing grey eyes were the subject of rumour, his black velvet tunic embroidered with silver threading that glinted like frost under the dim gaslight. Every step he took echoed against the silent stone, a warning and a mystery rolled into one. The people of Ravenscourt spoke of a plague, not of disease alone, but of shadows that seemed to twist and linger longer than natural. Alaric, ever the observer, noted the changes with a detached fascination. Windows shuttered themselves as night fell. Amps flickered in patterns that almost resembled messages. Townsfolk avoided the central square where the old clock tower rose like a sentinel, its face cracked and hands frozen. Only Alaric dared venture close, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching him from every shutter and doorway. His fingers, gloved in soft leather, traced the contours of his silver amulet, a talisman said to repel malevolent spirits or perhaps attract them. The merchant guild had sent word to Alaric about the disappearance of their finest goods, silks, spices, and even gold coins. What alarmed him more, however, were the notes left in their place, letters scrawled in ink so black it seemed to absorb the candlelight, adorned with crude sketches of crows perched on graves. Each letter carried a single warning: the plague comes for those who watch, and those who wait shall fall last. Alaric knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that this was no ordinary thief or common superstition. Something older, darker, and insidious had taken root in Ravenscourt. As the sun surrendered to the horizon, a heavy mist rolled in from the northern canal, curling through the narrow streets like living smoke. Alaric made his way to the tavern known as the Broken Lantern, a place frequented by sailors, thieves, and those who preferred to speak in hushed tones. Inside, the scent of damp wood and stale ale mingled with an undercurrent of fear. Patrons avoided eye contact, their hands trembling over mugs of dark, frothy beer. One man dared whisper of a masked figure glimpsed at the edge of the fog, a figure draped in shadow, with eyes that gleamed like coals, leaving death and madness in its wake. That night, Alaric returned to his manor, its windows shuttered against the creeping darkness. He lit candles in every room, their flames wavering under an unnatural chill. As he walked through the corridors, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him, yet no one was there. The walls seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the house itself breathed with life. In the library, dust-laden tomes of alchemy, necromancy, and forgotten lore lined the shelves. Alaric pulled out a small, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with accounts of previous plagues and the shadows that had accompanied them. He knew that history often repeated itself, but never with the same cruelty. Outside, the city's bell tower struck midnight. The sound, hollow and mournful, reverberated through the fog, reaching even the farthest alleys. Alaric stepped onto the balcony, feeling the icy mist seep through the fabric of his tunic. From the shadows, shapes moved, figures too tall and thin, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural hunger. Ravens circled overhead, their cries piercing the silence. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but Alaric, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to confront the unknown, descended into the streets, cloak billowing, eyes sharp against the darkness. As he moved through the deserted market square, Alaric noticed the signs, footprints that appeared and disappeared at random, a lingering scent of decay, and the faint, unmistakable sound of someone or something breathing just beyond the edge of perception. The letters had warned him, yes, but there was an intelligence behind this shadow, a consciousness that mocked human understanding. Alaric whispered a prayer to no god in particular, steadying himself. He had faced plague, famine, and betrayal in his 40 years, but this was different. This presence was alive, and it was watching him. A sudden flurry of wings erupted from the nearby rooftops. Ravens descended like black rain, their eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight of distant windows. Alaric raised a hand, and a silver blade shimmered from his belt. He knew these were no ordinary birds, the townsfolk were right. Something malevolent had taken the shape of their familiar forms. The air thickened, carrying whispers in languages long forgotten. Words like vigilance and despair echoed through the mist, embedding themselves in Alaric's mind, pushing the edge of his sanity. Yet he pressed forward, determined to trace the shadow to its origin. By the edge of the canal, Alaric found the first corpse. Its eyes were wide, frozen in terror, the mouth open in a silent scream. A crude symbol was carved into its chest, a raven clutching a skull. The fog seemed to thicken, almost protective, as if shielding the perpetrator from view. Alaric knelt, examining the scene, feeling the unnatural cold seep into his bones. History had prepared him for death, but never for a death accompanied by a palpable, oppressive malevolence. The city itself seemed complicit, as if Ravenscourt had become a living labyrinth designed to torment its inhabitants. Returning to his manor, Alaric scribbled notes in his journal, each stroke of the quill weighted with dread. He knew that this was the beginning of something catastrophic. The plague of Ravenscourt was no ordinary disease, it was sentience, vengeance, and darkness combined into a creeping force that fed on fear. And yet, within him, a spark of defiance burned. He resolved that he would uncover the source of the shadows, or die trying. Outside, the fog shifted, whispering promises of despair, but Alaric's resolve remained unbroken. In the city of Ravenscourt, night had only begun. Alaric's nights became restless as the fog grew thicker, curling through the narrow streets like serpents of smoke. The city seemed alive, whispering secrets only he could hear. Windows opened on their own, doors creaked without wind, and faint shadows darted at the corner of his eyes. His journal, once a tool for understanding, became a lifeline, the ink smeared with trembling hands as he chronicled the inexplicable. Every passage of history he studied, plagues, uprisings, and witch hunts offered him little guidance. Ravenscourt was beyond the ordinary scope of time and disease, it had become a theatre of madness where the shadows were both actors and audience. One night, Alaric wandered to the abandoned cathedral at the city's edge. Its stained-glass windows were shattered, pews rotting under the weight of years, and the air smelled of mildew and despair. He could hear chanting, soft, guttural, unintelligible, echoing through the nave. His lantern flickered violently as he approached the altar, revealing a figure draped in black, kneeling in reverence to an unseen presence. Alaric's pulse quickened, but fear was intertwined with fascination. The figure lifted its head, revealing a mask carved to resemble a skull, its hollow eyes staring into Alaric's soul. It spoke, but its voice was the city itself, a chorus of despair and anticipation. The masked figure beckoned him forward, and Alaric followed, compelled by a force he could not resist. Beneath the cathedral, a network of tunnels stretched into darkness, lined with the bones of those who had vanished from the city. The walls were etched with symbols, ravens, skulls, and cryptic runes that pulsed with an eerie luminescence. Alaric's mind strained to decipher them, recognizing the warnings but unable to piece together their meaning. Each step deeper into the labyrinth brought a chill that seeped into his very marrow. He began to question whether his pursuit of knowledge was wisdom or folly, but retreating no longer seemed possible. As he moved further, whispers rose from the darkness, recounting the deeds of those who had come before him. Merchants, thieves, and even clergy, each name etched in the air with invisible ink of regret and terror. Shadows detached from the walls, twisting into grotesque forms, mimicking the faces of the dead. Alaric recognized one in particular, a childhood friend whose disappearance had haunted him for decades. The figure's hollow eyes pleaded, but when he reached out, the form dissipated into a plume of black smoke. The plague of Ravenscourt was sentient, learning fear, molding it, and amplifying it with every heartbeat in the city. Days blurred into nights, and Alaric's own reflection became foreign to him. His gaunt face mirrored in candlelight, eyes hollow yet burning with obsession, hands trembling as they traced the runes etched in the journal. Sleep eluded him, and when he did close his eyes, nightmares of raven-winged monsters swooping over burning streets filled his mind. The townsfolk avoided him, murmuring that the city itself had claimed him. Even the walls of his manor seemed to lean closer, as if listening. His obsession grew with each day. The plague was no longer external, it had seeped into him, whispering in every thought, every doubt, every fear. One evening, Alaric encountered a child in the streets, pale and wide-eyed, holding a broken doll. The child spoke of a masked entity that promised safety in exchange for obedience. Alaric recognized the signs of possession, the vacant stare, the unnatural calm in a world of chaos. He tried to reach the child, but shadows leaped from the walls, forming a barrier that hissed like serpents. The city was alive with malice, feeding on innocence, twisting the ordinary into instruments of terror. Alaric realized that to survive, he could not rely on strength alone, he had to understand the plague's mind, its rhythm, its hunger. Alaric returned to the cathedral with a new purpose. He deciphered the runes, realizing they formed a map, not of streets, but of human consciousness, a conduit through which the plague communicated. Every victim left a mark, a pulse of energy that the entity absorbed, growing stronger with each fear-soaked heartbeat. Alaric understood that confrontation required ritual, a dangerous act of will that could destroy him or the city, or both. He prepared in silence, gathering rare herbs, silver charms, and incantations from long-forgotten grimoires. Each night, he rehearsed the chants, feeling the shadows push back, curious and resentful of his defiance. The night of the ritual, the fog was suffocating, curling against his skin like wet fingers. Alaric stood in the cathedral's center, candles forming a circle around him, the symbols carved into the floor glowing with cold fire. He began chanting, his voice firm but trembling as the shadows reacted violently, twisting into monstrous forms that screeched and clawed at reality itself. The masked figure emerged, towering and ethereal, eyes burning with hunger. Alaric's heart pounded, and every fiber of his being demanded retreat, but he held his ground, speaking the words that would either banish the plague or consume him entirely. The shadows surged, forming a vortex of darkness around him. Alaric's voice rose, carrying over the cries of unseen creatures, resonating with the ancient symbols beneath his feet. The city trembled, stones cracking, and fog boiling as if alive. A final, terrible screech erupted from the vortex, and a single raven shot upward, disappearing into the mist. Silence fell abruptly, the cathedral still and empty, save for Alaric, kneeling, exhausted but alive. The plague had withdrawn, for now, but its essence lingered, like smoke curling around corners, reminding him that victory was temporary in Ravenscourt. Alaric emerged into the streets at dawn, the fog beginning to thin, revealing a city scarred and hollow. Ravens perched on the roofs, watching, silent witnesses to the night's events. Alaric knew the city would recover slowly, its citizens haunted by memories they could not fully recall. He walked through the cobblestone streets, feeling the weight of unseen eyes, a reminder that the darkness had retreated but not vanished. His journal, filled with observations, rituals, and warnings, would be left for future generations should anyone dare confront Ravenscourt's shadows again. In this city of whispers, Alaric had survived, but at the cost of part of his soul. Years passed, and Ravenscourt remained a city of fog and whispers. Lord Alaric Wren, now older, walked with a cane and eyes that had seen beyond the veil of human understanding. He was a man transformed by the city's malevolence, haunted not just by shadows but by memory itself. The city had survived, but its pulse was different, slower, more deliberate, like the heartbeat of a creature lying in wait. Alaric's manor, once pristine, now bore the marks of battles unseen, windows cracked, walls darkened, yet the silver amulet around his neck glimmered faintly, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of Alaric's encounters, some dismissing them as stories to frighten children, others knowing the truth. Merchants returned to the square, but their wares carried a cautious air, as if fearing the shadows might consume them again. Children were warned to avoid the streets after sunset, and priests muttered prayers beneath the cathedral's arches. Yet despite these precautions, the fog returned each night, curling through alleys, curling around corners, whispering of the lurking malevolence that never fully departed. Ravens perched in silent vigil, their black eyes watching, eternal sentinels of the night. Alaric spent years chronicling his encounters, compiling grimoires of knowledge that were as much a map of human fear as a record of the city's dark history. He worked in isolation, trusting no one, knowing that curiosity was both a blessing and a curse. Yet occasionally, he would hear whispers from the shadows, small movements in the periphery, and fleeting shapes that reminded him the plague was not gone, it had merely retreated, biding its time. Each night, he would light candles in the cathedral, repeating the rituals, maintaining the fragile barrier between the city and the darkness beyond comprehension. A young scholar, intrigued by rumors, sought Alaric's guidance. She was named Isolde, with porcelain skin, dark hair cascading to her waist, and eyes that reflected both fear and determination. Alaric observed her cautiously, noting her intellect and courage, but also the same curiosity that had nearly destroyed him. He began to teach her the rituals, the history, the patterns of the plague. Every lesson was a test, every mistake could summon the shadows back into full force. Yet within him, a spark of hope flickered, perhaps someone could one day understand and truly master Ravenscourt's darkness. Months of study passed, and Alaric watched Isolde grow in skill and comprehension. She moved through the fog with measured steps, her eyes sharp, voice firm, her presence a counterpoint to the city's oppressive despair. The plague responded, subtly shifting, testing her resolve, whispering threats, manipulating shadows to probe her mind. Alaric noted each reaction meticulously, recording the intelligence of the darkness and the courage required to confront it. He realized that the plague had not been merely a physical threat, but a test of will, a challenge posed to those daring enough to look into the abyss. One night, the cathedral shuddered violently. The plague, sensing its opportunity, surged forth in full force, a living storm of shadow and whispers. Alaric and Isolde stood together, chanting incantations in a rhythmic cadence that seemed to clash with the entity's dark pulse. Shadows coalesced into monstrous forms, towering and grotesque, eyes burning with a malice that had no name. Alaric felt the weight of his age and previous encounters, but Isolde's presence steadied him. Together, their voices rang out, a defiant chord against the chaos, forcing the darkness to retreat once more into the folds of fog and memory. The city exhaled a quiet sigh, the fog lifting slightly as dawn approached. Alaric realized the true legacy of Ravenscourt was not just survival, but vigilance. The darkness was eternal, but so too was the human will to resist it. He entrusted Isolde with the grimoires, the rituals, and the knowledge of the plague, knowing that one day, she might need to face it alone. His own strength waned, but through her, a line of defense would endure. Ravens, perched silently on rooftops, watched the passing of guardianship, their cries both mournful and triumphant. Years later, Alaric's name became legend, whispered in cautionary tales, his deeds exaggerated into myth. Yet the truth remained in his journals. Ravenscourt was a city that thrived in fog and fear, where shadows had memory and malevolence was a constant companion. Those who walked its streets after dark learned quickly to respect the silence, to avoid the alleys, to heed the cries of the unseen. And somewhere in the mist, the remnants of the plague lingered, waiting, watching, a test of courage for the next generation of guardians. Alaric, in his final years, walked the city one last time, feeling the pulse of its streets beneath his feet, the fog curling around him like a familiar cloak. He saw faces of those long lost, the lingering marks of the plague's touch, and the resilience of a city that refused to yield completely. He understood that darkness and light were intertwined, that fear was both a weapon and a teacher. The city had changed him, scarred him, and yet, in its horror, he had found purpose. Ravenscourt was not merely a place, it was a living testament to vigilance, sacrifice, and the fragile triumph of human will. When Alaric finally passed, his body found in the quiet of his manor, the city mourned silently, as fog rolled over rooftops and alleyways, concealing the memory of those years of terror. Isolde continued his work, guarding Ravenscourt's streets, chronicling the shadows, teaching the few willing to learn. The plague, though weakened, lingered in whispers and the wings of ravened sentinels, a reminder that darkness never truly dies. And so, Ravenscourt endured, a city of whispers, vigilance, and shadows, forever bound to the legacy of Lord Alaric Wren, the man who confronted the night and left its memory for generations yet to come.